Good morning, everyone. I am really pleased to welcome Sam Jackson, artist extraordinaire, to YouTube this morning. Good morning, Sam.
Morning.
It's quite strange doing a YouTube interview like this when you're actually only up the road. We could have done it in person.
Yeah, the joys of technology. Yeah, but there's probably something quite what's the word? Almost like post internet, isn't it, to do it this way as well? Even though we could do it in person, there's something quite digital about doing it this way as well, isn't there? So yeah.
Well, it also gives us a lot of room to talk about your work, which we're going to go through on the screen.
Absolutely.
And I have called our discussion today Deeper Reading, and I shared the presentation with you before we started, but what do you make of the title Deeper Reading in context of me aligning that somehow with your work?
Yeah, I think it's a really kind of I think it's really interesting because obviously at first I think I've always wanted people, the kind of viewer, etc., or the audience as such, whatever that might be, to kind of get to have a deeper read into it. And I think for me anyway, as an artist, there is a striving that there's something just beyond the surface, that the kind of beyond the aesthetic that the recipient can go to. So I think it's and it's that's kind of what I've always strived for within the work, like an emotional kind of depth. So in relation to a deeper reading, and maybe there is still surface there on purposely, but it's sometimes it's cool to kind of get into the deeper stuff as well. Yeah.
There's also another way to look at it, and I wonder if you would approach this with some kind of horror, but that because you use so many symbols and bits of text, that people may spend time with your work, especially when they have to approach it and not view it from very far away because it's smaller scale, some of it, that they are reading. They're actually reading something that takes them, for example, from top to bottom or from left to right.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I was speaking to someone in the week actually in terms of is there like a poetry there? And but if that, regardless of what that is, that would still fall into this sense that they are actually, yes, reading the picture in some way and the surface, the top as such. And and it's again interesting using that word, that my reticence as well, or not reticence to that deeper meaning, how much is given within that is also a kind of push and pull for me in terms of how much information is given to the audience, and like vice versa in this now. So
well,
it's almost
I thought we may approach this later, but we really are just going straight in, which is absolutely brilliant. But I did write down actually whether to ask you, do you enjoy distance from the audience? Because you've actually said, I think it was in Floor magazine interview,
right,
that there was a sense of enormous privilege in actually being able to engage with an audience. Yet at the same time, you also said, I think in the same interview actually, that it sets up a distancing between me and the audience when you were talking about that kind of communion space that may happen between the painted surface and the viewer.
I think it's this classic thing that we're always kind of, not to kind of get into quoting people again, but it's that classic, almost like Joy Division thing, and it like touching from a distance. There's a thing there of wanting to be like, is there a universal understanding that we all have, and also sharing that, but also maybe that it's kind of a knowingness that it's impossible as well. So there's almost like a futility to it in a certain way, because inherently we are just in our own bodies, in our own minds. So we can only ever be, it's only so much of someone else's experience we can truly experience. But I think that the very act of painting, what can be translated through that visual medium, can go maybe one step further than maybe sort of like sometimes relationships. I mean, they'd probably say more than I can say, the work. I mean, it's always been that classic thing that obviously you know, painters are generally quite, well, artists can be seen as, you know, it's only probably a new idea that, I suppose Picasso is quite good at that talking, but, you know, most artists, if you look at history, some of them have been like quite well kind of presented. But, you know, I also understand that this idea that that they shouldn't give too much, and, you know, we're supposed to be doing this rather than being able to talk about it in a certain way. So they probably say it more better than I can. So yeah, it's
but does that mean that you're bringing that there's this interplay in your work between exploring something and making a statement? And I wonder about that with your work, that a statement to me implies something that is closed, it's done, whereas exploration is something that is still yielding and will continue to yield.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that relationship between the closed, the open, the statement, and the exploration?
Well, I suppose because some of them are statements that are being kind of that I'm, say, placing onto them. If we see them as actual, see, whereas I don't, unless these new ones, collaborations are of actual people. Before the portraits, we wouldn't really class them as portraits. I'd class them almost as just like spaces, ciphers of something. So really they were kind of, so I could really, even if I put a statement on, so like that one, Take Me Home, I think what I'm doing is kind of like trying semiotically to also pull that apart in a certain way. So like, what does that mean? What does that mean by placing it there? What does that mean by the fact that she looks kind of, you know, probably maybe from the 40s or 50s, kind of 1940s, 50s era. So a constant like push and pull, but so that the statement is sometimes placed, but then almost maybe undermined continually with other markings.
I was going to say, your kind of semiology is pretty specific, though. You know, it doesn't necessarily come from maybe the widest span, yet it pertains to the widest span of experience.
Yeah, that's got, yeah. That's because maybe that's when you I suppose when you fuse into that, it's all kind of maybe it all just leads back to the same thing anyway. So I mean, a lot of the kind of the text might be repeated through them, the source material, kind of literature, music, but that can be kind of fairly well varied in terms of like specifics of genre, time, you know, different I suppose different eras of literature that then are kind of place it, and obviously like subconscious thoughts, and also this play on the fact of, because I'm placing and they're there, does it mean to say that I kind of then that's me in a way? Because it could just be that at the time that's what makes the painting visually work, really not. Whereas so what these collaboration ones, there's definitely, you know, it pertains to them. So it's essentially it's easy. It's that's kind of
just
easier.
For people who don't know. I mean, at the moment we're looking at what I took as a screenshot from the Charlie Smith website, which is a wonderful kind of, if anyone doesn't know your work, a really wonderful, almost like a one-stop shop of your work, because you open up Sam Jackson on the Charlie Smith website. That's your gallery, and you have all these very uniformly sized images that kind of act like thumbnails. You can click on them and see the image bigger. But to see them all together like that and be able to scroll down them, I think we said just before we started that there's a sense of uniformity, yet when one pauses and picks out an individual, there's a sense of engagement with a total individualism. And for you, when you discuss and dialogue with the people at Charlie Smith, do you have a say in how they go on to present how your work is seen? So you make the work, you intend it to come forth into a public space. Do you make much of an impact? Do you implicitly trust what they do? I know you have a very good relationship with them, and you have written before about how much they really champion and support your work and the gratitude you have for that. But I wonder, how much of an impact does this kind of formation have? And did you have a say in what this would look like on your page, for example, not just in the gallery?
No, I mean, the specifics of the actual kind of setup of this, yeah, it does. It's almost a kind of like a panel, isn't it, of kind of things, but it's like a work in itself. It's like really cool when you see it like that. So yeah, in terms of that, will just be, I suppose, the most efficient way of showing it, but kind of like to give people the information that are then going to the website. In terms of, so do you mean in terms like the sets? So on this page in front of us, if we go from like the top one in the left, on my left, so the fella at the top with a black and blue down to the corner one of them before next to Take Me Home. So most of these are just collaborations that I've done. So these are in essence the most quote unquote, you'd say portraiture, straight portraiture, if I was ever going to go into that zone where they are images that people of themselves that they send me that I have previously collaborated with in some way. So e.g., I'll now potentially do one of you, Sandi, because we've collaborated, because you've interviewed me. So that could be a collaboration in the future. So I could paint you that I would see that as a collaboration in some way. We've worked together on something. So all these we've worked together in some way. And then we don't, and then in essence, we kind of have then collaborated on the painting, but not physically, because we then speak together. Generally, it's been on Zoom, and we discuss the work, and in a certain way that maybe the tables are turned where I'm kind of almost interviewing them in a weird way. So, you know, we discuss things they're into music wise.
But does that, I'm interested in this now, it's kind of emerging. Do you find that makes you more or less active in the mode of making? So actually, are you a conduit? You're using the word collaboration. And this kind of push and pull, give and take between you and the subject. When you engage with people and you have a sense of working with them on something, then when you go back into the studio and you go through the process of making, is it that you allow them to flow through you? So you're a conduit.
Yeah, in essence. And obviously some of them I would... Yeah, absolutely. Because even that small contact is enough for me, because obviously some of them I have a more deeper relationship interested in terms of the kind of the title of the interview here than I do with others. Some people I've only ever met, we have collaborated, but it might have been a while ago. And some people I've got to know more so in that process. Some of them, like my brother, for example, and obviously I've collaborated with him all my life. So it's a kind of it's a different process. But that's the more I find these more difficult to do.
Oh, I was going to say, does the kind of emotional proximity to the painted?
Yeah. I mean, I try to not have it. Yeah, I try not to have there's that, and also, you know, there is probably a fundamental pressure of that I suppose there is an onus on making sure that kind of even though, you know, everybody understands what they're kind of venturing into, and it's for a you know contextualized contemporary painting show, so they're not looking for, like, you know, graphic realizations of themselves. It's not about that. There's an idea, there's an ethos, there's a concept behind the show. It's not you know, this is a portrait of you, a commissioned portrait, etc. So there's something they understand that, and I hope most of them understand my work as well. So it is that. But I do think there is probably an underlying pressure that potentially to do with then representation and likeness that I can sometimes feel a bit overwhelming, and I do want to get them. I do want to get that right in a certain way, but still make them difficult, because I'm not essentially a portrait painter in that way. And yeah,
you I mean, in preparation for the interview, aside obviously knowing your work and looking at it and making my own kind of determinations about what I find. You're a really excellent artist to read about because you have had very in-depth conversations with a wide variety of people. And also actually lots of people have written at length about you and your work. And I was reading Tony Benn in 2011, I think it was for The Fearful Joy, said that you access part of our cultural memory that we feel familiar with. Now, in response to memory and likeness in portraiture, for example, and I don't want to take what Ben wrote out of context completely, but when we're looking at a panel, as you described it here on the screen, do you hope that people find the familiar in that perhaps they might pick out features in a face that makes them think, actually, I kind of know who that is? Or we said before about the top one is Dan Carter, who presents the heavy metal show on radio, BBC Radio. But do you hope that people are finding the familiar in the forms you commit to? Or do you want them to be anonymous as such, even though you give them so much kind of information in that surface plane? So you're giving them a likeness, you're also then giving them extra information in the form of symbols and text.
Well, again, I suppose focusing on that show, that's actually that top one, Simon Rumley. Oddly enough, he does. There's an element there. He does slightly look like Dan Carter. Dan's also an artist as well, Simon. So he's a kind of he's a filmmaker. He was one of the first ones I did, interestingly enough, and so I know Simon very well. And it's interesting how that they kind of like start to generate themselves. But there is certain I think tropes or modes I think that I connect in with that I'd like then the viewer, but not actually maybe the sitter, the person as such in a traditional sense, the sitter to maybe connect with in some way, which obviously is well, because obviously a lot of them then, you know, that's a recent kind of mode of working I've done. Previously, before that, everyone, I call them the figures, the portraits, whatever you call them, ciphers for something, were unknown. So it's always from a secondary source material or from other paintings. So that does change the dynamic of it, I think. Yeah. So let me come on to say something like this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is something I wrote down and I think I shared with you before we started. It's kind of like, at what level do you hope to penetrate the viewer's understanding? So at what points do you hope to either conceal or reveal something about identity? You know, in terms of maybe looking at your painting, for me is very much about moving through layers of understanding. Again, pertaining to the title, Deeper Reading. There's an immediate surface, and then there is the navigation of symbols. There is the intense curiosity about words, like the linguistic element of what's there. Then there's a likeness, which in itself is a funny description for portraits of people we don't know. And then there's the overall sense of having entered. So it's kind of excavation. Now, are you putting stuff in the way of our understanding?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of it's always interesting to kind of because obviously when I'm working, it's quite an innate process for me, and then when you kind of, but I'm aware of that because, as you said, people have kind of deeply looked at them and kind of commented and written about them. But yeah, I think there is it's a maybe a way of understanding something through this process of an initial start, and then of though some place of humanness. That's why I could never really, in essence, like, it always comes back to the to the figure for me, because there's also probably something to do with the body in some way, and the fact that it's because I previously go back like 20 years ago. I mean, I had looked at kind of, you know, as young artists do, I'd kind of looked at like landscape, etc. And but for me, there's always something, there's an absence with that. And, you know, I still do love that kind of genre of work. I love that there's something different between this idea, as I said, of trying to, what we could do then with if we see it as portraiture, but as I said, they're not. But
that relationship with the body, I'm just going to flick back. The kind of corporeal reality of what we are. Your characters, if I can call them characters for a moment, have their own kind of relationship with through their kind of melancholy, I think, a sense of death. There's like a heaviness of death. I always find, and I don't think it's as simple as to say, oh, well, it's because of the dark backgrounds. I think there's, you know, there's something, I don't mean that there's a necessary heaviness, because death doesn't need to mean that. But there is this sense of relationship between those characters and their inevitability. Sometimes I hope this doesn't in any way offend you, but I often initially considered your work somehow having a relationship for me with Marlene Dumas, for example. And this idea that we're encountering characters again through time who may already have missed us, that they're somehow already over, and there's a kind of like a worshipfulness of their passing.
That's a really beautiful way of saying it. Yeah, I mean, there's probably, but there is a kind of not just a fascination with the kind of death thing, but maybe there's something in them as well that maybe only painting can do, that sort of like solidifies that or keeps that. And probably it's my journeying through that kind of this idea that I still find it bizarre that obviously we're the only species that as well that know we're going to kind of die and that type of thing. And, you know, Picasso's last portrait of himself when he was about to die with his eyes, there's something really haunting about that stuff. And, you know, the when it starts to become like a real essence, it starts to become reality in some way. And the dark backgrounds, obviously, you know, we've discussed before the kind of, you know, the power that them paintings would have, like a Rembrandt in terms of he's documenting his demise, and like the Caravaggio, etc. You know, how that really could get a sense that there was an imminent, maybe he's forecasting all the time. I mean, there's some great books on Caravaggio that I've kind of dipped into a few years ago and I've found, and then come back to again later. But this maybe that is always painting their own deaths in a certain way. Yep. I don't know. There probably is something in that. Maybe for the psychiatrist's couch or something. I don't know, but there is something that there is definitely. And of course, you know, that's quite an interesting link in terms of that stuff as well, because to kind of diffuse that though, that quite, again, as we've chatted about before, in terms of that could be seen as quite a masculine idea or a dominant thing, that the fact that these become then, you don't have the dimensions here, but they then become tiny.
Yeah.
So that one of her it's the previous painting there is the size of a CD case.
I know we're still kind of talking about the last one, but I want to also transition to this work really, because this sense of, well, you know, I'm going to ask you a little bit about gender and the kind of the balance between something that is gendered and something that is human. And you know, I wonder about your thoughts on whether being human is being gendered or not.
Yeah, that's a really kind of interesting kind of strand, and anybody who would know my kind of practice was kind of, I'd really looked at a lot of how kind of growing up in probably quite a very much, I would say kind of quite a very kind of, they'd say that, you know, buzzwords now of toxic masculinity, etc. And then how that was transfused into me, but always feeling like being in that, but also separate from it. And then how that's related to kind of as you then move through life. And then, as you said, like gendered roles within that, and the passiveness and non-passiveness of both female and male, I find quite interesting in terms of that relationship with each other and them and themselves. And if you can put, like, you know, can you put potency of that type of thing within to, like, you know, again, this is the size of like a A4 piece of paper, this painting. Can you start to translate and discuss that type of thing in a contemporary manner of that scale within painting? And they're the kind of challenges I'm trying to set myself in, very kind of minimal, like quite minimal means. But there is an attitude that I'm trying to get to with these as well. I think there's an attitude. Yeah. There's
a couple of things in this. One is that, you know, again, you've spoken before about this, so I'm sorry that we do revisit a lot of these issues. But, you know, there is a sense of maybe violence in any depictions, actually, of fellow humans, because there's a tension that arises between one identity and another. That could be the identity of the painter with the subject. It could be the identity of the subject with the viewer. It could then obviously somehow waver up into the ethereal universe where we have the communion between the artist and the audience through the prism of the painting. But this violence, again, I'm quoting from someone else or paraphrasing, but you did say before that you're approaching the transgressive with a balance of delicacy. That, you know, that's kind of I can't remember what interview that's paraphrasing from, but there's a sense all the time that there's this threat of almost violence, and then it's somehow dialed. It's not dialed, taken away, but dialed back enough that we can reach other things. So, looking at something again, titling very important to you, unconditional love. Fuck her. That's so much, again, to kind of be confronted with, that I wonder viewers who are repelled by it don't get the full experience, obviously, because they don't spend the time perhaps to get to know where this is, what this is. Is this an image that is specific to gender? Is this an image that is transgressive? Is this an image that defies or conforms to wider convention? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I did definitely. I mean, I've done a few of these kind of. I would class them as, so like, they're like pants paintings, which is probably like one of the first people who've done some type of paintings. But again, I didn't really kind of. It's the fact that it's that torso area compositionally. Again, you can't work out whether, again, kind of male, female, and you know, you said it really eloquently there. That almost like them three layers between, like, you know, as it goes through stages, isn't it? It's like 1, 2, and 3, and you end up at kind of like, maybe it's the relationship with the audience, and its relationship with self, and then you've got this, like, you know, that other one you mentioned as well, which I can't remember, but it's almost like this balancing act of the transgression, like what we can and can't say, and within a painting framework, but also how much of that is kind of needed before we kind of start saying something. Like, we don't need to hit someone over the, like, my work's never, but you know, some of it before was more kind of it was more like, so I would say erotic in a sense, but never slipped into the fact of pornographic, because I'd spoken to a lot of female artists at the time, and I remember speaking to Vanessa Jackson, who taught me at the academy, and she was saying, this is eroticism, Sam, and she's like, you know, she's this is what these are where these are being placed, because your placement within them and I'd still kept the balance generally between kind of, and it's like I was going into a different space and then wanting to kind of put into a different space with this, but kind of connected to it, and then also not connected to it, but also being the author of it as well. It's a very,
that almost sounds kind of ritualistic, what you're describing. Like your personal ritual at finding the form. Again, you've spoken about like a process of painting, but actually the process of painting in itself is ritualistic, not the actual action, but the psychological unfoldment.
Yeah, and that's probably then tumbling into coming back from that, this idea you said of like the memory of something. So as the paintings, the physicality of them, the making of them starts, then obviously my cognitive self is then starting to kind of be involved with that, and it's a kind of distancing. So in terms of the text, that's always been a ploy that I've not a ploy, but something I've kind of I'm not that kind of, I don't know if I'm that,
you're not a trickster.
Yeah, but then I'd say that, I mean, there's again, I spoke to someone in the week, and hopefully my work has always come about, and generally how I am, that there is a certain honesty to them as well, which I kind of, if that can be possible within a painting, that's what I've tried to kind of get across. And this idea of like, so, you know, you have that word across there that could be seen, oh, that's like, because even now, like when we see text and language, it still has, words still have, they do have power to
well,
it.
I was going to mention that, this idea that actually I used the word conduit before, and then that kind of implies to me, again, this is a very linguistic link, but that there's a sense of passivity, that you're allowing this to happen. But I wonder if in that passivity, can something that is the confrontational element of what some people might perceive in your work, there are many things that are quite confronting, I would say, for most viewers, actually. Even if they then get past those things and resolve what it's really about. But that actually, although they're confronting, they're also passive. Can that be? Can there be passivity in something that is so confronting?
Yes, I think I can. I think that's probably what I, in a certain way, am trying to kind of do, because the actual image, as you said, it's full frontal as such, isn't it? It's that sort of thing. But there's also like this almost contradiction in terms of the delicacy of that as well, in a certain way. So it's kind of like it can be that, and it can also be that, and it can speak of other things other than just what people might initially on first reading think it is about. And obviously all our ideas of what we say we might think unconditional love is very different to what you might think. So what such as, so again, it's this idea that there's
a lovely quote by Krishnamurti that says, if we have to think about love, it's not love.
Yeah, probably. There you go. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, yeah.
I was speaking in the week with people of our mutual acquaintance, and we were looking at Origins of the World by Courbet, which hangs in the Musée d'Orsay, and shows an abundance of very dark pubic hair and the inner workings of deep femaleness. And the surprise, even now, with mainstream access to, for example, pornography, that there should be anything deeply shocking in it. And that this is the reality of our bodies. Again, this idea of a body space being somehow other is most bizarre. But again, with your work, I wonder if the body space does become other, because there has to be, I feel like and this is what makes your work so brilliant to me, is that I have to go through my own process to reach the bodies in your work. Which is why I asked you about kind of deliberate obstruction almost, that maybe I wonder if you don't want us as audience to have immediate purchase.
as though they're kind of blocking in a certain way.
Yeah, that you have to confront this symbolic narrative.
Mm.
Again, it's layers, isn't it? Excavation.
Yeah, and there's an essence of that final thing would then be almost, maybe it's too much for me to do that. That'd be too much for me to just to get to that thing where it is just, maybe they're a kind of they're almost side, they're like alleys for people to go down, rather than actually be directed to the and maybe that's an art, maybe that's a maybe that's my artist.
I think that's your superpower.
Yeah,
you take us into the corridor with many doors, and you invite us to enter, but you don't make it easy. I think you realize I love that.
I mean, that's interesting. Because if they were obviously struggling with that idea about how can you know, even if we go into this idea that like it's portraiture and and where I'd studied and the history and all that stuff, then how can you make portraits in 2022 that are like contemporary portraits in a contemporary art world? And it's like, how does that manifest itself? And if you say, like, take a Jenny Saville painting that's clearly about, like, you know, the body and the scale of that and the weight of it, not just but in like depth and like the meat, the flesh as such of that. Yeah, I think and then say, like, I was doing that from, say, like a male perspective of me, or that maybe even if, because again, as we probably go further into this, we won't have enough time anyway, but it's like people often ask me, I don't separate myself off from the person either, gender-wise. So I don't see that as really as a woman here. I see it as both man and woman.
I sometimes wonder if there's a connection also. I mean, I mentioned Marlene Dumas before, but in terms of text and then reading through text interventions in the visual, someone like Jim Goldberg even, I mean, that's so vastly different to what you do in one way, yet in another way, I meet Jim Goldberg's photographic images and I read what the people in those images have written, and it transforms that this point of transformation in any visual encounter. I can actually watch that happening in myself, and I see it when I encounter your work. But the difference is that I think because the text and the symbols overlay, and I do see it as overlay. I don't feel that they're kind of inscribed into.
That's interesting. Yeah, because
they're these layers, and they are an attempt, I feel, sometimes to repel me, which of course makes me more curious and want to go even further. Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely because you always had this idea of like, oh, are they tattoos and that type of thing? And it seems such as, and I previously I did one of my very first like heads I'd done for my school show. I did a portrait of a kind of this young boy, and then on the side of his face I'd written like CUNT on the side of his face, and clearly it was a case of like, was that an intention? Was this like on? Because it doesn't really matter. Like, obviously there's the connotation of word, but it's this conversation about, is this like on the person or on the painting, or is it part of the painting? So is it, is this supposed to be referencing like a tattoo? Is this supposed to be referencing? But
also it raises questions about the applicable violence that one might attach to a word that simply describes, for example, a part of a human anatomy, a female
anatomy.
This is very subtle link, and I hope it's not too obscure, but again, in reading other interviews you've given, you described growing up and encountering skinheads, and that they represented something to you that was unlike any other model of masculinity that you'd seen before, but that there was this almost like enthralling sense of, well, what is this? This is amazing. Yeah, but also understanding your vulnerability and the fear of it as well. That kind of an oscillation between desire and being scared, a sense of being caught in the compulsion to approach, but the need to retreat. And I read that and I thought, that's what happens to me when I look at your work.
Well, that's maybe that's what I'm always trying to.
And I wondered, is it like almost like a kind of spiritual connection between these experiences you've had?
And
that's, again, it's problematic when I then try to think of you as passive and a conduit. Yeah, I also wonder about the presence of self in any of these experiences we think we've had. Yeah, and then because obviously them experiences of that, they seem to be with me all the time. And they say don't look back, but I do tend, they seem to, or maybe they're in the kind of subconscious, but as you said again so eloquently there, in terms of like, that wanting to, not wanting, because obviously I was younger, but this idea of like attraction with kind of with something that shouldn't, but I suppose attraction to something that is like harmful and then violent is a strange, and beauty involved in all that stuff as well is a very heady mix. I think again for these balances, these points of change, these things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but yet there's also a sense that we have established relationships between sex and death, between truth and lie. It seems to me that you're always at that point of change.
Yeah, and it kind of probably just moves around in terms of what my kind of and as you progress our relationships to it, as we progress through life, I should imagine.
It's been an interesting journey through the slides, really, because I think I had a kind of sense of anxiety really about what I would pick, and it seemed terribly pedestrian to just go through things chronologically, but I do think there's also a value to it, which is why I've ended
up completely
finishing it relatively recently, and wondering if this is in some way a revisit or a departure from you.
It's interesting, these like kind of like when sort of like the paperworks, again, it's interesting you brought up the kind of Jim Goldberg. There's definitely something about like marking on something that's already there, the kind of inherent beauty. Then there's sort of like the scrawling, the kind of subconscious nature to it. But I do think there's something about my love as well for that work. There is, I think it's this contradictory nature of, like, you mentioned there about seeing the kind of that kind of the fascination I had with like kind of maybe subcultures that I'd seen when I was growing up, but then also this kind of love of kind of beauty as well, and how that's placed within that, like maybe a longing, and it's undercut all this idea of like there is something. I remember when I was studying on my degree, and one of the students there, a female student, she said, "Oh, there's a," even though my work then was like, it was pretty full on. She was saying, but there's something like really romantic about these still.
Yeah.
And I think there's something there, and that's the thing. I don't think, even when I've tried to like really push it to levels where you think, oh my God, this is like, this is. I think I've always been fully aware that you kind of like there's something else that kicks in with me that draws it back into that space for me. So I think that's probably which these maybe tap into more so, because obviously the source material, the image is already there, but I still approach it in exactly the same way as if I'd paint it. So in terms of ownership of it,
I was going to say I think there's a possessive quality of this, and that speaks to me actually of your confidence now as a mature painter.
All right, I mean, there's, I mean, I don't feel as though I'm working on someone else's painting as such. To me, it seems as though it's just mine, and it's there for me to start working on. And again, it's this idea of like ownership of stuff, and again, maybe a thing of like, why shouldn't I? This maybe linking in. I mean, I'm too young enough to be kind of around when that kind of like true punk was. I was born in 77, so I was like more of a like 90s in terms of my youth. But this attitude thing of like, well, if I can work, like if I want to work on this, I can, and then that's okay. Yeah.
And I know we're just coming to the end, but historical high and low culture. It seems to me that you're a bit of a Shakespeare of contemporary art.
I don't. Again, it's probably I've always loved looking at pictures, I think, and I think that's and from a youngster, kind of just looking at books. I've always been very drawn to this idea of the visual in some way.
Is this because also because you want to push something that is subcultural or subversive into the mainstream? Maybe, yeah. So there was something. There's something the way maybe about how I just sensitized the world around that visual thing around that world around me. That it just seems to have a very kind of profound effect on me. Whether it was a painting, as I said, that I might have gone to see at a gallery, which I was quite, I didn't think I was lucky at the time to go to a gallery, but coming from a council estate, that was quite a rare thing to do, to go and see like a painting show in London, like, because obviously I was born in London, so we could just get on the tube and go and see something. But because none of my friends knew about stuff like, it was like they didn't know about anything like that. So I had that. So I knew that was something. I kind of had that in my space, but I was also then very kind of linked, like gauged into say what kids would also like when I was a child, like what people were wearing and that type of thing. So there's a real kind of oddness with this interest, I think, just with the visual a lot of the time. Yeah, I did actually. I know you mentioned about having some work. I did actually have a picture of. I did actually find some older work of myself, but we can look at that another time. I've got an image of it, but it'd probably be difficult to get this up now. Yeah, but I can. Oh, we can do a reprisal. Not a reprisal.
A repeat.
Yeah. I do want to just say something because this sticks with me, and it's from quite a while ago. It's from 2009. It's Edward Lucie-Smith writing, who you know very well. He works for. Does he work for the gallery? Is he?
No, he's he's
free floating.
Yeah, just kind of yeah. I mean, he's a wonderful person, and hopefully he's not too well at the moment, so hopefully he'll kind of get better. Yeah, but I mean, he's been writing for writing about art for a very, very long time. Yes.
Well, he described you as a likely agent of change in the British contemporary art scene.
Thank you, Edward.
And I think, he wrote that in 2009. And we look at your journey from then till now. And there is a sense of change, because I think maybe there was a fear that painting would die. And though this isn't just you, and there are many other painters working to keep it alive, it's more than that. It has its own life. Painting has its own life. But I just wonder, to finish, why does painting survive other forms?
Well, Sandi, they've tried to write off painting countless times, haven't they? And even that conversation itself, I think, there's shows that are even called like, is painting dead and da 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 da. I think now it's probably, oddly enough, it's kind of strongest. I don't think it ever goes away. I think, in terms of our educational system, art schools have gone through periods where they have, I personally think they have probably ostracized it in some way in terms of like the video work and the digital. But I mean, something that's so like coded into us as human beings, it's primeval to put something on and just mark something. Will kind of it'll never go away. And the people that say it will are just kind of they don't know anything anyway.
They can get lost. They can,
absolutely. They'll come back to painting anyway at the end of the day, even the people that sort of like, it's just
Sam, it's been really fascinating talking to you about your work. I'd love to talk to you again about it even more.
Yes, that'd be I think we could do like a few of them, etc., because it's nice to put it into context. I think it was really good that you did the chronological thing, but I mean, there's again, probably linked into a lot of this because I'm quite prolific. There are certain universal threads that have been running for it since day one that, you know,
we haven't even touched on half, I'm sure, of what you could say.
Yeah, so that's and to see how you can arrive at a certain space, it's that would be very that'd be really good for me to do as well, because it's really great for me to see the work and speak to you about it and get your insights to it, because they really will help me. Yeah. Well,
thank you, and thank you also on behalf of anybody watching, and also my students who I think, you know, fan club moment.
Oh, hello to the students. Yeah.
Sam Jackson.
Keep on making.
Keep on painting.
Keep on keeping on painting and making amazing artworks. Yes, that's the main thing. Yeah, that's the best thing. That's the only thing I could really do at school. So.
Sam, you've been amazing. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you. See you later.